Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 141 of the Unpolished MBA podcast. And yes, we're still in the series called the Acquisition Chronicles. This episode will mostly focus on Jed Morris, though. As you guys know who have been listening throughout this series, Jed Morris has been one of the guest co-hosts throughout this series. And now, if you remember, when Jed introduces himself at the beginning of each episode, he mentions that he had a business that he bought that ultimately failed. And we dig deeper into that story in this episode. Now, keep in mind that Jed was a self-funded searcher, and we talk more about the difference in that and being a traditional searcher in a previous episode as well. But make no mistake, the same series of events can happen to anyone in either one of those positions. So it's not unique to one type of searcher. And it's also important to me to remind everyone that's been listening that the information we've been sharing is not meant to scare you at all. Acquisition is a great part of entrepreneurship. The reason we're sharing the information is to equip you with some tools and some things to think about so that you can make an informed decision. Jed's honesty and insights will inspire you for sure, but it's also meant to educate anyone interested in entrepreneurship through acquisition, or basically buying a small, cash-generating, cash-flowing small business. So listen in as he shares his candid journey through acquiring and eventually closing the small business he had acquired. Welcome to the Unpolished MBA. I'm your host, Monique Mills, and we're in season 10 of this podcast. I'm excited to bring to you our winter 2024 series called the Acquisition Chronicles, Real Stories, Hard Lessons. This series focuses on the real-world experiences of buying and selling small businesses. For those of you who don't know me, I run TPM Focused Strategy Consulting, where I work with startups and small businesses to align their strategies and drive growth through innovation. About 2 years ago, I entered the acquisition space myself and have been actively reviewing deals ever since. Now, this series isn't about theoretical advice. It's about real stories from the trenches. And as someone who's actively navigating this world, I'm sharing my own experiences along with my incredible co-hosts, Jed and Kenza, who bring their unique perspectives as acquisition entrepreneurs as well. Now, we're sharing not only our stories, but those of our network as well. Some things must be kept anonymous because of the situations, but together we're sharing the real deal about what to look out for and how things can go very, very wrong, which is something no one is really talking about in this space, but it's important for everyone to know who may be on or considering joining this space. So whether you're thinking about selling your business, looking for your next big opportunity, or just curious about how this all works, this is the series you'll want to follow.
Hey, Unpolished MBA listeners. I'm Kinza Azmat, and my path to entrepreneurship is anything but polished. From engineering at Southwest Airlines to supply chain at Apple, I got tired of being a cog in the wheel. So I became a business broker instead and advised on $26 million in deals across industries. Then I bought a few companies of my own and pulled off an unexpected turnaround. Now I help other entrepreneurs navigate their small business journeys, from buying to selling to everything in between.
And hi, everyone. I'm Jed Morris. I'm a 10-year Air Force veteran and NYU Stern MBA graduate. After leaving the military, I pivoted into big tech. Before realizing corporate wasn't for me, I bought 2 businesses in Southern California. And I learned a lot about what it means to operate and ultimately fail in small business. Today, I'm focused on the defense industry, where I'm buying businesses and then mentoring aspiring searchers on how they can best navigate the journey.
So continue to listen to new episodes that will drop every Tuesday from December 3rd to February 25th, 2025. Learn more at unpolishedmba.com/ETA. Now let's dive in. All right, Jed, I have been seeing lots of posts about you releasing a book. And I want you to tell me a little bit about this. I want to at least start with a quick elevator pitch about it.
Yeah, it's a passion project, really. It started off when my business failed. When I had to do my settlement, I had to sign a non-disclosure, non-disparagement agreement, as does most people who have a business fails. There's usually a settlement in place. And, little by little, I started connecting with people online and LinkedIn and started finding other business buyers who had had a failure and were prevented legally from discussing the details. And as we all started talking together, I started realizing there's a lot of lessons learned here about what happens when a business fails, that a lot of current and future searchers are just simply unaware of. And so the idea was, I'm going to take my story along with the stories of those who have had a failure that are willing to talk. I'm going to anonymize those stories, especially the details, and then publish those in a book. And the idea is to keep the essence of the story intact, but really draw out the lessons learned. That way, people can have that as a resource, hopefully right next to Buy and Build and the HBR guide, as a way to see, what happens when you move into insolvency. What does a PG look like? What does bankruptcy look like? What is it like to go through these types of settlements? In which case, this is the first time I've ever been sued. The first time I've ever had to sue someone else. What does that feel like? What does that do to your family? And so this is my effort to try to compile these stories and get those lessons out there. And we're projecting to have that released this fall 2025, to help line it up with the EPA conferences that happen.
So when you say signing a disparagement agreement, who initiates that? Like you can't talk, basically saying you can't talk bad about any of the parties involved, I guess. But can you talk about it? And then that's one question. And then the second one is, who initiates that? Or is the seller saying, hey, don't say nothing about us? Or is it the bank saying, oh, don't mention it was us? Like who is initiating that?
Usually it's not one party that's initiating, at least in my experience, conversations. It just happens to be a piece of the settlement that is put in place for all parties involved. And so I'll start with that. So usually if there's a settlement, then that's because, there's a seller's note, there's a disagreement with the seller in some way, there's a disagreement with investors or LCs, and the bank is a player, but not one that's as worried about the disparagement. And so once you hammer out the details of the settlement, which takes a while, those are the things that people don't realize, like when your business fails and you go into litigation, this is months, this is 6, 12, 18 months. I mean, it takes time. And so when you're all done, obviously when you come out of a lawsuit, there's some hurt feelings. There's some things that you'd rather not people talk about. So, maybe somebody was at fault, but they don't want to admit that legally. Maybe both parties were at fault. And you don't want to admit that legally. And so it's just a really easy way that when you finally do get to the settlement, you just put a bow around it and say, hey, we're not going to talk about this. We're not going to talk about the details. And we're also not going to publicly disparage the other party. We're going to find a way to close this chapter and just move on. And so that's why when you hear me on a podcast, the first part of your question, I will not discuss the details of my settlement. I won't discuss the details of the issues that were at conflict. I will simply say, we've gotten to a resolution and we've all moved forward from there. But what I will do though, is I'll talk about my story as a searcher, my story as an owner. And then once we get up to like the insolvency portion, I'll take a step back and say, hey, I can't discuss my details, but here's what I will do. I've been working and speaking with numerous other searchers, people who have bought a business and that business has failed. And based on my experience and the experience of others, here are the things we've learned. Here's the top 5 reasons we've seen these things go south. Here's what happens, generally speaking, when you move into a settlement. That way we can still get those lessons out there without naming names or putting anybody in legal jeopardy.
That's interesting. I always thought that a lot of these things were in public court documents, like people can find online. Is that the case for this as well?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure exactly what all you can find, but I do know that our litigation was filed publicly, so I don't see any reason why an investment journalist couldn't go out there and find it. So to your point, it's a little bit moot. Like if someone really wanted to go find out, they probably could. But I think the idea is that it's kind of an older practice where you're not expecting me to go out there and just like lambat XYZ party that was involved and would say, I was right, they were wrong, or vice versa.
Yeah. Okay. So the documents probably wouldn't get in the details like that on. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's a good point. So even if you looked it up, you'd find all the official motions and you'd see what we were arguing about, but you might even be able to find a settlement. I don't know, but you wouldn't be able to say like legally who was at fault. You could draw your own conclusion for sure. Here's
All
one
right.
example. Like a couple of the people I've spoken with, they were traditional searchers. So they raised a search fund, acquired a business, and then that business failed. So you can imagine LPs don't want you talking about it. Like what if the CEO was fired by the investment? What if LPs weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing? Or what if, what if the searcher, the CEO really sucked? Like the LPs don't want to talk about that. So it's a very insular community. And when these types of investments fail, I mean, especially on the traditional side, you probably don't want all your dirty laundry just thrown out there that could impact, if you're the buyer, that could impact your ability to get a job in the CEO in the future. Or if you're the investor, your ability to draw in qualified search.
You mentioned traditional search. So a lot of folks think that that's the safe way to go. That's the safe way to go. It protects them from these kind of things. And that's not true.
I mean, it's true if your definition of safe is I don't sign a PG. I mean, sure, that's true. But I mean, I did a call live. It's on my YouTube channel. I did a call with Joe Odell, 2 months ago. He, with a partner, bought a company through traditional search. And, he spent 3 years working on that company until it ultimately failed. And although when it failed, he didn't sign a PG, I don't think he'd be the first one to tell you that he wasn't negatively impacted from that failure. Like he put a lot of time, sweat, and money into that deal and has nothing financially to show for it. And so that's tough. I mean, you get out of something like that and all of a sudden, like me, you're like, oh, now I got to get a job because I got to pay the bills.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there is no such thing as no risk. And especially as a traditional searcher, you are not the equity owner in the deal. So if you're not pulling your weight, just like a public company, you're the CEO. You can be fired by the board or your LPs. So it's a completely different dynamic. And I really encourage buyers and searchers not to think of traditional versus self-funded as a equity decision or a risk decision. It's a lifestyle decision. It's a career decision. Do you want to be the CEO of a middle market company? Then traditional is for you. Do you want to be an owner operator of your own business that you control? Then self-funded search is for you. And if we're going to be really, really frank about this, if you don't have the connections to raise a traditional search fund, then your decision is made for you. And if you're not coming from an M7 MBA program, then you do not have the ability realistically to raise a search fund. Let's just be really clear about it.
Okay. So basically, if you don't have the connections, the decision has been made for you. And it takes me back to one of our previous episodes. I think it was the very first one we released in this series where I was talking about the risks with raising money the way that it's done in the ETA space right now. It's not smart. You don't know these people. And most of the time, people are raising money once they have a LOI signed. And so everything is rush. And you don't know the folks you're trying to raise money from. They don't know you. And still, they still want some type of say in the company. And so I'd like to know if part of your book addresses, well, let me put it this way. Is there like a percentage amount of stories that are traditional search and then self-funded searchers?
Yeah. So I'm not going to pretend from the beginning that this is scientific or that I've got a realistic share of stories, but because what I do is I reach out and I try to find people that way. And so by definition, the people I speak to have self-select. And so as a result, right now I've got about 20 stories that I've included. And
oh, that's a lot, Jed.
Yeah. 15, 16 of them are self-funded. So only 3 or 4 are traditional. I don't think that's representative of the failure rate of those models. It's just representative of who I've actually spoken with so far. But the part that really threw me is that, we look at the default rates for SBA, especially for like self-funded searchers, and we're like, oh, that's really low. But 1 or 3% is a lot of people, especially over the last few years. Like you don't realize just how many deals that is. Not that it's not that I should say that it's super risky, but it's not zero. And probably the biggest thing that we're running into is people misallocating the risk. Like, you should understand what it means. I've spoken with 20 people, over the last, who have had a business fail in the last 4 years. These are real people who have signed real PGs, who have signed, bankruptcy and lawsuits and Chapter 7. And it's crazy.
Why do you think they self-select, and what's their incentive for telling their story?
Part of it is therapy. Like, I know for me, you can't talk about it. So it's like, I cannot believe all this happened. But at the same time, I really think, from the conversations I've had, it's a genuine desire to help other surgeons. And so one of the first pieces of pushback I get when I tell people what I'm putting together is they'll say, oh, well, the buyer, the owner has their own, agenda. They're not going to say what they did. They're going to blame the seller. They're going to blame the lender. They're going to blame their LPs. They're going to blame somebody else. And I just haven't found that to be the case. There's a lot of really good self-reflection saying, hey, these are all the things I messed up. These are the things I should have done better. And these are the things that if I knew now what I knew then, what I would avoid. And it's been really powerful. I think it's because people genuinely want to help. And anecdotally, I think it's also because of all the hype you see online. Like, everybody, all this hype out there about like, oh, go buy business. It's low risk. You need no money. It's passive income. And then you talk to somebody who's literally in the trenches for 2-3 years, fighting off bankruptcy, fighting off litigation, and to come out of that and see what's happening in social media and just be frustrated that no one is saying, hey, this is really what happened.
Yeah, I think, Jed, you touch on a really key point, which is there's so much shame in the process of being a failure or a fail forward story, that a lot of us stay in the silence and we just, we don't have anyone to reach out to. No one really talks about the failures. All of the people who are really successful sure as hell don't talk about the journey to the success, right? And so we think that we are singular stories, that there's no one else really like us out there. We just suffer in silence. So I think your book will be really powerful in shedding some light on the true statistics of business ownership, right? And, as a broker, 17% of businesses were actually sellable. It was incredibly difficult to find business owners who wanted to sell and who had sellable companies. And so I saw those statistics, but those statistics are not communicated widely with all the hype around business acquisition. And, this is the way to generational wealth. And really the path is lined with a lot of challenge, a lot of hardship. There are lessons that you can learn that will definitely help you before you get into it. But also the expectation around what you're headed into is something that you need to adjust, because business is about failure. Every entrepreneur I've talked to, whether they are successful or not, has stories of, skating by, but barely, about potentially losing it all, people who have lost it all. And so to set the expectation that, yeah, you might really look failure straight in its eyes, and it might not happen to you, or it may happen to you, but that is part of the business success story. And that's the message that I would want people to take away.
That right there is exactly why I've tried to be so transparent on LinkedIn about my story, because, we all talk about how failure happens, but no one wants to talk about it until they have their big sit down and they look back and, oh, here's all the times I failed. I was at 14 years success with all these failures. And one of the things that I didn't expect was that when I started posting on LinkedIn, like, not only did I fail, but it happened right now. By the way, I need a job. Not like that helps because it's authentic. It shows people what's really happening in the real time. And at the same time, this is the part that's really been the silver lining for me. I've had so many current owners reach out to me and say, I'm currently going through insolvency. I just filed for bankruptcy. I think this could happen to me next month. Can we talk? What's it like? What should I be thinking about? How's my family going to know that? And, those are real people with real stories.
It's even harder now when these types of things happen because the job market is insane. It's super insane. So a lot of folks still find themselves considering different types of entrepreneurial ventures, right? Whether it's consulting, whatever it is, product, whatever it is, at least we know more about entrepreneurial avenues than ever before because of the internet. However, a lot of the stuff out here is just not true. They oversell, overhype up just way too much. And it's not helpful to those that's genuinely trying to find a path forward. You guys are both right about folks online that, will really only share the success once they've gotten there. But sharing along the journey is so important. And I think a lot of folks reach out to me to be a consultant to cohorts of entrepreneurs because I tell the dirt right now. Like I'm a professor in the business school for entrepreneurship and innovation when I have time. And I tell them the failures every week. Like literally, I talk about it all the time. To me, it's just a normal part. Like, that's why I don't call it failure. I call it learning, right? And then I'm like, I have to pass on this learning to you guys. Guess what? And they'd be like, oh no, that happened. Like, yeah. But this is why I tell like young people to build up your nest egg and don't fall into the hype of everyone telling you you need to be an entrepreneur and never work for someone. Because had I not had, and you can still deplete that nest egg, don't get me wrong, but had I not done that for years and years and years, I couldn't come back from a lot of this crap that I'm telling you.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I mean, I think back and, we talked about search funds for a little bit because they tend to have more data. I mean, if we look at the Stanford search fund study, like a third of the people who embark on the quest to find a business to buy don't even close on anything. Can you imagine taking 2 years of your life to full-time search to acquire your one great American business and end up empty-handed? And these are people who actually raised and had the background, right? Imagine what that really feels like to be in their shoes and leave with nothing. And of the people who actually acquire, I believe a third of those actually have negative ROI, like they destroyed and eroded value. So imagine what that feels like, that not only did you raise the fund, go through the process of finding a business that's worth acquiring, that your investors all aligned on, and then you took the seat and for whatever billions of reasons exist in small business, you lost and eroded value. I mean, imagine the shame. Imagine the shame that they look at when they look at themselves in the mirror, right? But we only talk about the people who have positive ROI and we celebrate them and raise them on pedestals, and they absolutely should be celebrated, right? It is a battle, it's gladiator. But what about the vast majority of people who don't make that happen? That's what we would really benefit in talking about.
Yeah, I'll follow up with that real fast because, one thing when you raise money for investors, you're getting them to buy in on you. And that's important, especially as a traditional searcher, because when that fails, then it comes back and hits you personally. You feel like, and I can tell you as a self-funded searcher, I raised money. I raised money from veterans that I knew when I was in the Air Force. I raised money from business school classmates, and I raised money from friends that I've had for 20 years. And a couple $100,000, lost it all. And it's very, very difficult when you have to get on the phone with someone that you know, like, and trust, who's a friend, and say, hey, I'm sorry. I know you're not rich. I lost your money. And I don't know how I'm going to get it to you, but I'm going to get it to you. So it's a tough conversation. So it hits you in your pride. It hits you personally. And it really does make you feel like a failure. I understand why people don't want to talk about that.
Are those relationships still in place for you, Jed? For all of the folks?
They are. I would lie if I say they weren't strained. It's tough when you take, 20, 30, 50 grand from somebody who's not rich and you tell them, hey, trust, believe me, I can do this. And then you lose it all. And then all you can do is come back and say, hey, I'll get it to you. It may take me 10 years, but I'll get it.
What's the time frame between when you acquired the business and it ultimately had to shut it down?
For me, it was about a year. The actual, mine was a little bit more of a gray area. So the actual acquisition was closer to 8 months, but I had been working in the business with the owner for 6 to 8 months before I actually bought it.
Did you know you wanted to buy the company when you first started working with the sellers?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, that's how we started talking. So I started talking with the seller. right from the beginning, I was like, wow, tell me about your business. I was searching it. Certainly wasn't searching for landscaping, but when you see something, you're like, wow, that's interesting. And then it turned out that this particular person was just wonderful, like really nice, really cared, wonderful person, built a pretty amazing business out of nothing, just the sweat of 45 years of working, and had done the right things. And by that, I mean, high quality work, lots of customer, like he did the right things. And then the parts that in the business that weren't good were the parts that, that you're there to build, the bookkeeping, the CRM, the presence of marketing, all the business back end stuff. And so, I started working with him early on, and, it was a simple understanding. I was like, hey, I'm going to come in, I'm going to help you build up this business a little bit. I was like, at the worst case scenario, I'm able to help you with a little bit of free work. I get to learn. Maybe it helps you as well. Best case scenario, we decided this is something that's going to work for us, and we'll move forward with an acquisition. And we decided to go with the acquisition.
Okay, so your story, will it be in the book, or will it not meet that disparagement agreement threshold?
My story will be included in the book, but it will be, the details will be changed. You probably won't be able to tell it. But the lessons will be there. And that's the idea. And that's the other thing I would say, like with all of these stories, the only way I can print them is if, we put them you rewrite them and retell them in a way that you couldn't tell easily who it was. And that's a legal requirement for the protection of the buyer. And so what I can say is that the details of it will be the same. The issues at play will be highlighted. And at the end of each story, we're going to draw out 3 to 5 key actionable takeaways from the story that are influenced directly from the buyer themselves, and say, this is what I learned. This is what I want searchers to do.
That's awesome, Jed. Let me tell you something. It gave me this idea. As I mentioned, I do teach in the business school when I have time. And last semester, I taught this class on validating the business model before going out there, right? And I had come across this business here in my city that had failed. And publicly online, there were community members trying to raise money to keep this business open. And a podcaster decided to have the business owner on their show and dig into the details of, what are you doing? What's going wrong? And like grilling them on, that's wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. Where's your money? Where's this? Where's that? And it's like a 2-hour podcast episode that really goes in, and, you can tell the business owner was like nervous, and, but like she would say things, and then it was like, oh, no, I didn't mean to say that. Like, it was just so much pressure. It's literally a hot seat. And like I said, this was 2 hours long. I broke it up into multiple segments and showed it to my class, and we would stop at different points, and I would say, what could be done differently there? What component of business is overlooked right here? How could she have validated this before spending the money on that? And I see that your book, once it comes out, I'm ordering it. But I can see how your book could be a total tool. I would create a whole workbook to go through each story and dissect de-risking and mitigating things, and
I love that idea.
How would they think about things? That workbook would be killer.
I literally just made a note about that. That's a really great tip.
Oh, I'm ready for it. Before I don't want to wait to the end to get to this. What's the title of it?
It's working. So right now I have a working title called Buyer Beware: Real Stories of Business Acquisition Failure. We have some time. I may adjust that, but that's what I'm doing.
Buyer Beware. I love it. You have a website or sign up or something right now, right?
I do. I've got a pre-sale page up for it. So for people who want to get involved early, and the incentive there is that if you get involved early, then I'll have some snippets from these stories and I'll release them to the people who have pre-ordered that, so they can kind of get some look aheads, as well as be a part of the launch party when it comes out in the fall.
Jed, I love that. And I love how you're helping so many people. I want to tell you this though, too, because I tell my students this as well. It's very hard. Maybe it's just me, but finding genuine, good people that just want to do right by everyone when you're in the entrepreneurship world. Like everyone has an angle and it's always something you just like, okay, what's the angle? What's the angle? And I don't see that with you. We met just through this podcast, and I genuinely would love to have you speak to my class when this comes out. So one of the things is at the university, I'm speaking with them now about creating an ETA educational type series because only top business schools even know about this topic. But it's one of those things where I want to encourage this generation that's coming through to pursue jobs working for these small business owners because everyone wants to work for Google and Facebook and Microsoft. I'm like, dude, it is a small business around the corner from you who would love your management skills, would love to have someone help them bring things up to par. And, I think that there is a gap there that could probably help these businesses continue operations, be transitioned and sold in a better way because they're already at a certain point, and someone who buys it doesn't have to start from scratch. You have leadership that's young and fresh and understands the business and will probably stick around once they retire or sell. I just want to bridge that gap some with young people because not everyone can work for Facebook and Google. And so having those kind of conversations are important, and also letting them know it's a possibility once they have some experience working in the workforce themselves. Perhaps they may want to buy a small business and things of that nature. But having your book be a part of that program, I definitely want to do that. And I also want to have an associated workbook with it so we can work through scenarios while we go through the program. Because I know ETA schools are not doing that. I know these ETA accelerators are not doing that. So no one is prepared for all of the what ifs that you will be sharing in this book. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, Monique. I'll tell you exactly what my angle is. It's to build authority and build trust in the market. Because like we've been saying from the beginning, especially in small business transactions, there's a lack of trust for a lot of reasons. Incentives all over the place. And so my first most important thing is just to be really clear about my experience, be really clear about the experiences of other people, and bring those lessons learned to current and future buyers. That's step one. And then over the long term is to be able to build that trust to a point to where, when I start building this business, when I start helping buyers meet sellers, when I start talking to sellers, my reputation goes way in front. You don't have to question whether or not I've got your best interest in mind when it comes to representing you as a seller, when it comes to matching you with a buyer, when it comes to telling a buyer, yeah, you're qualified. No, you're not qualified. And just being really open and honest about that. Because, when I was in the Air Force, our very first core value is integrity first. If you don't
integrity
have that first, man, you can't do anything. I can't do anything for you. I can't do anything else. And, part of this project is personal therapy. Part of this project is helping other owners who have failed. And part of it is helping, searchers and current and future searchers understand the risk analysis better. And I think it really kind of hit me all at once when I had a discussion with an MBA student at Penn's Wharton School of Business, like fantastic MBA program. And this person was telling me they tried to find somebody in their ETA club to come and talk to them last year about their business failure. Couldn't find anybody. And
of course not. It's the ego.
Yeah, maybe they didn't find maybe they didn't look hard enough or whatever. But what I do know is like no one's talking to me. And I didn't plan to be in this position, but here I am. So I'm going to talk.
Yeah, and I think the other part of what we just touched on is that there's ego, and you're trying to be vulnerable, which I think is so powerful and so brave. And also, I've seen plenty of cases where people are being vulnerable and brave, and they get roasted, right? Like in Monique, you talked a little bit about the business owner on the podcast. Like, how brave for someone to go on a podcast and be in a hot seat for 2 hours, whether they know it's a hot seat or not, and actually share the specifics of business, lift under the hood. And even as I've been writing my own book, it's incredibly scary, right? Like you're taking all of your journals, your personal journals about a tribulation that you went through, that many other people went through on the flip side, right? I'm the leader. There's other people involved whether it's service providers, the team, the previous business owner, right? And you're taking all of those and turning it into a long form text of like, hey, this is what happened. This is what to learn. This is what to take away from it. And yeah, like I've been roasted for the same story before because it was in the wrong form, right? I went on a podcast and shared the story, and it was just not an appropriate channel for that story to happen. I shared my story in a way in which I couldn't actually stand behind my name because I didn't want to expose our team and lose that confidentiality. And I'm glad that I would never do that again, right? Because I want my name behind stuff. I want to say, hey, these are my learning lessons. This is my story, and I'm going to tell it myself. So I believe for me, a book is a more appropriate form for the complexities that I walked into. So hopefully it helps people. And I believe Jed's book will tremendously help people as well. Whether they acquire or not, they'll at least see the stories and wonder, what are the real success stats, right? How often is someone tripling EBITDA? How often is someone actually closing on a business? And it's important that we bring all of that to discussion.
Absolutely. So, Kinza, I'm asking you 2 questions. Are you going to be in Jed's book? And are you writing the book too?
I'm not in Jed's book because, he talked about the stories, and I haven't yet talked about my story with him, but I am going to be on his podcast coming up, and I'm really excited to be on an episode of his pod.
It's not too late to change this, Kinza.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll just take my 300 pages and condense it into short form to put it into your book and anonymize it.
That would be an extremely powerful collaboration, but even if it's a separate book, because this is one of the things we've discussed on this podcast series. Jed's experience in life as a straight white male is different than Kinza as a woman in STEM as well, because you're an engineer, woman in STEM, woman of color, woman in general in this world. So the depth and the breadth of her experience it's going to take up a book of its own. And I'd love to see it have that space, So you could do both. You could do one or the other, but I'd love to see a book with all of your experience woven into it.
Yeah,
well, I really like the collaboration between us because, like you said, perspective matters.
Yeah.
100% too. And you think about like the story and like the context of sharing it. And, it started out as journals. And then I read a paper. It was a paper out of Stanford by somebody with the last name Kessler. Thank you for writing it because it talked about Stephen Kessler. Thank you. Yeah. The search fund themes of failure. And so before I acquired, I had read that paper because I'm a bright bee ready to be prepped and like want to know everything. And so I was like, oh yeah, I don't have any of these themes. I'm good. Like, I've talked to a bunch of different people. And then post acquisition, 7 of those 9 themes arose. And it's important to be well prepared as you go in and not think that you're good to go, because you're really going to discover whether you're good to go on the flip side. And so as those 7 themes really expanded, it turned into just, words, tons and tons of words. And so I think it'll be really interesting too, Jed, for folks to get like the I don't want to say condensed because I think it's going to be super punchy, like those condensed stories that are super punchy that deliver those key takeaways, and then juxtaposed with my story, which is just my story. And it's like more detailed and it talks about some of these themes in specific context in a small business. And then, broadly, we talk about the acquisition entrepreneurship space and some of the misgivings and the areas in which we could improve and hold ourselves accountable to the learning, right? And what the effects of that learning might be on others. So
yeah, for sure.
About 2025.
Yeah. So I just brought up your landing page for the book, Jed. There's a way for folks to sign up for your email list. Will they get access to your newsletter too if they sign up for the book?
Yeah, great question. So if you do pre-order the book, you're automatically added to the newsletter. If you feel like it's too much for you, you can unsubscribe at your own pleasure. But the idea of the newsletter is it's going to be a lot of these weekly stories, not just the stuff that's going to be in the book. So if you pre-order the book, you're going to get some early glimpses and stories of some of the stuff that is included. But the newsletter is also designed to help just bring a lot more knowledge and awareness of the real world facts when it comes to buying your business and just entrepreneurship in general. And so you'll see me talking about issues that I think are important. You're going to see me bring on experts who are smarter than me in a lot of areas, such as quality of earnings, legal and accounting. You're also going to see me bring on the perspective of some owners. There's a lot of great owners out there, and, understanding as a buyer, putting yourself in their shoes is incredibly important. As Kinza will tell you, she's as a broker, so just having a better understanding of the self-funded route, what it takes to be successful, and is it really for you? Learning those things ahead of time is really invaluable, because you hear me being critical about a lot of the information you hear out there about buying a business, but I'm a big fan of entrepreneurship through acquisition. I still am. I think it's an incredible opportunity for the right person and the right opportunity in the right way. My hope is just that I can help guide you towards your right deal that fits for you.
Yeah, and giving them a framework to think about things. It's not meant to scare you. It's to help you prepare, mitigate, think about what ifs, because you don't know what you don't know. And, you can read the books, but it's not the same thing as talking with, someone who has done it, or as in your case, even spending time with the seller. I want to ask you this, though. When you spent time with the seller, I'm guessing it was extremely beneficial. But what do you think was probably the biggest gap that caused the failure for you and the landscaping company you acquired?
The best response I can give you is that it's the same reason most small businesses fail: cash flow conversion cycle. That's really what it is.
Customers weren't paying on time when
you're not collecting. Bills. You obviously have to sell, but if you're not collecting those payments fast enough, if your bills are coming in too quickly, if payroll is overextended, if you're not on top of cash flow, then you cannot succeed. You can have $1 million in accounts receivable, but until you turn that into dollars in the bank, it doesn't exist. It goes away. So really having an understanding of the cash flow in your business, understanding exactly where it's going to be, how fast it's going to move through, shortening that accounts receivable window and extending out the accounts payable as much as possible, while maintaining relationships with your suppliers and vendors. It's critical. It's absolutely critical. It's the number one reason why small businesses do not succeed. And I'm a big fan of, you don't need to have an MBA to understand cash conversion. And we've mentioned this before, small business owners typically don't have MBA, but they absolutely know where their dollars are. And so that's the most important thing. Second to that, though, and this is something that's backed up, not specifically in my story, but in the numerous stories I speak with owners, is that who you do a deal with is the most important aspect of it. When you buy a business, the seller becomes a business partner with you, even if they don't have a lasting relationship, because the seller left their culture and imprint all over that business. So if the seller has integrity, then you can trust that there's probably not something hiding in the product. There could be a million things broken, but nothing hidden. If the seller does not, I have seen sellers come after buyers when every financial incentive is there to keep them from doing it. They'll do it anyway because that's who they are. The scorpion will sting you because that's who they are. It doesn't matter if you put earnouts in place. It doesn't matter if you have seller notes in place. It doesn't matter if you have a purchase agreement with representations and warranties and non-compete clauses and non-tampering clauses, because if you do a deal with someone who can't be trusted, they're not trustworthy. They will break that. And as a buyer, you don't understand this because you think, hey, I got a contract. Hey, I could sue you. That's great, but that's not how behavioral finance works. People are people with emotions and pride, and they want to do what they want to do. And even if you are 100% right and they break the contracts and you sue them, that's still going to take 8, 12, 18 months for you to come to a resolution. And in the meantime, whatever happened in that business, the business is probably failing, and you have to keep it going. And litigation is expensive. And is your legal team up? And there's so many variables there that, it is not worth your time. We're looking for positive ROI, not destruction of value.
Not destruction of value. I love the term you use, behavioral finance. Is there a book on that?
There's a whole industry on that. Yeah,
really?
It's exactly why people think they can beat the stock market. Like Joe Schmo, gets a
that's
trading
the
account
term
on
for
E-Trade.
that.
They think they can beat the stock market. They don't know the first thing about options trading. They don't understand that they're up against high velocity traders in New York, and they don't understand that they don't have Bloomberg terminal, and just the idea that, you can win in a game that you don't know the rules, when we all know, just put your money into an ETF. Like, we know that. It's proven it. And it's not just that we know it because people say it, it's proven scientifically. And so the fact that people don't do what's in their own best interest in finance is like the crux of behavioral finance. It's we think we're smart.
We think we're smarter. That's it. That's it. All right, Jed, I want to thank you for sharing that with us. And we're going to put a link to the page where you folks can sign up and get access to the pre-sales for the book and the newsletter as well. But this is definitely something you want to read. And it's something I want to incorporate into the university as well. So thank you, Jed and Kenza, for joining. Thanks for joining us on the Acquisition Chronicles. Today's episode hopefully gave you some key takeaways and reminders. We appreciate you listening. And if you found value in today's discussion, please share the podcast with someone who might benefit. We'll be back next Tuesday. Thank you for listening to the Unpolished MBA podcast. To hear more episodes or to request to become a guest, please visit unpolishedmba.com.